These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. So when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. The tricky part here is that the word gods, plural, and the most common name for the specific God of Israel, it's all the same word, Elohim. Now, Elohim is technically a plural form, but it has a quite wide semantic range. It can mean gods, and it's used that way. It can mean heavenly beings. So it's used to refer to angels, good or bad, in the Hebrew scriptures, and when it's used as a proper noun, it means the God, Yahweh. Problem is, they don't use capital letters in Hebrew. You just have to figure this out from context. And here, the initial context indicates it should be gods, plural. The verb for brought us out of Egypt is also plural. So we have that. Except then the subject of the phrase is the singular golden calf. And so you end up with this weird kind of phrase, this is your gods, or maybe these are your God. In fact, that is exactly what a lot of scholars think this should be translated as, even though it doesn't really make grammatical sense in English. In English, we don't have a sentence structure to convey the ambiguity, or perhaps better, we could say the confusion that is written down in this sentence. And you can see it here, because look at how Aaron responds. He built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. Now, Lord, L-O-R-D, all capitals, that means that is the tetragrammaton, Y-H-W-H. And with that, there is absolutely no ambiguity. That is the personal name for this God. That is the name that was given to Moses earlier in the Exodus story. I will be who I will be. So what's going on here? Well, for one, this is not a conversion story. This is not apostasy. The people are not leaving one God to find a better 1/1s. This story is not a contravention of the first command, you shall have no other gods before me. This story is a contravention of the second command, you shall make no idols of me. And here's why that's important. The people here are worshiping the God who has saved them. They're just not doing it well. See, in the ancient Near East, the image of a calf, technically, what this would have been was a young bull. So don't think of a baby cow here. Think of a young, fertile bull. That image was very frequently associated with all kinds of different gods. Why? Well, because what's the point of having a god? It's someone to look after you. And what do you need someone to look after? Well, all the stuff that you can't really control for yourself, right? And in the ancient world, often that came down to weather and fertility. In other words, the gods were about thunder and babies. And if you're a man running around in the ancient Near East, and it's kind of nice to think of yourself as a big, strong bull of a man with lightning-fast semen, kind of like impregnating two birds with one stone, why don't you picture your God that way as well? A God who will make your flocks grow, a God who grants you more children, a God who intends for all of your wealthiest dreams to come true. In other words, Israel likes this God, Yahweh, a lot. They like how the story has been going so far. They just want this God to stay on the terms that they prefer. And I wonder if all of a sudden this sort of weird old story about golden calves and Bronze Age superstitions all of a sudden doesn't start to sound kind of maybe just a little bit relevant. Because religion is not just about choosing the right God, it's about the way we imagine that God in the world. And this God, who frees slaves, this God is not your fertility God. This God is not your prosperity God, or your war God, or your political God, or your sports God, or your blessing God, or even your personal God. This is the God who intervenes on behalf of the slave, who proclaims good news for the poor, freedom for the prisoner, sight for the blind, who sets the oppressed free, to quote Isaiah by way of Jesus. And yet, as soon as the Israelites are free from the clutches of those that oppressed them, they start trying to reimagine this God as the kind of God that would give them all the wealth they need to maybe even turn around and do it all to someone else. And this God says, nuh-uh. That's not the game we're playing here. I'm not interested in the imagination of worship where you stroke my ego and I fill your quiver. This God isn't interested in just worship. This God is interested in transforming the world for the better as worship. And so here's the hard edge of the story for us. You and I, we can absolutely worship the right God in the wrong way. And that means you can call yourself a Christian, and you can believe the right things about Jesus, and you can hold a festival to God and say all the right words and wave all the right flags, and you can still be absolutely diametrically misaligned from the divine. If the intent of your worship is for you and not for your neighbor, then the God of the Exodus will ultimately say to you, I'm not interested in your golden calves.